Hello and welcome. I'm Ramesh Ramachandran and you're watching a special broadcast on DD India. Over the next 30 minutes, we'll get you all the news, views and analyses about Brazil President Jair Bolsonaro's visit to India. Now, President Bolsonaro is the chief guest for India's 71st Republic Day parade. What does his visit mean for India-Brazil ties? How can India and Brazil take the relations forward? Two special guests would join me in the studio to answer some of those questions so that you, the viewer, know what it takes to be on top of the news. All right, joining me in the studio are two very special guests. Ambassador Dilip Sinha, who retired from the Indian Foreign Service. In fact, Ambassador Sinha served as India's Deputy Chief of Mission in Brazil between 1999 and 2002. Also joining me is Professor Sreeram Chaulia, the Dean of Jindal School of International Affairs. Gentlemen, thank you for making time to be on DD India. Appreciate it. Professor Chaulia, if I can come to you now, as Ambassador Sinha mentioned, do you fear and suspect that probably India and Brazil interact more on the multilateral fora than bilaterally? You think there is a need and a sort of need to boost bilateral ties in trade investments, in climate change maybe, in defense and security, in biofuels. What's your take on the present the state of play in India-Brazil ties?
Ramesh, it's not a either or situation. We do need bilateral engagement which is based on more deliverables like economic, especially trade and investment, on which the two leaders are focusing right now. But of course the multilateral is important because in many ways it shows that both these countries aspire to lead the developing world and to be taking the cause of the global south for equity in the international system and the order. On bilateral, definitely the volumes of trade have been disappointing. I mean, it's 8 billion is the bilateral right now. They had prioritized to reach up to 25 billion or more, and Prime Minister was talking about 2023 when we have 75 years of diplomatic relations, we would want to reach bigger goalposts. So I think the agreements that were signed today will help. Now you look at energy cooperation, for example, their oil and gas, Brazil is a very reliable and a stable, relatively stable country in South America, unlike Venezuela, which is right next door and is going through convulsions. So eventually I envisage that Brazil will fill the gap that may arise from the instability in Venezuela for us. And despite the geographical distance, the tankers traffic across the oceans continues, and I think it will be a reliable. And even on bioenergy, the agreement for research on bioenergy shows that ethanol, Brazil is a leader in that field. So there are lots of concrete practical benefits we'll have. Tomorrow day after tomorrow, after the Republic Day event, President Bolsonaro is chairing a business forum where there is an emphasis on defense industry cooperation and such things. So I think there are fields, I mean, even on animal husbandry, which Prime Minister mentioned, it's very interesting that Brazil, historically has had a huge, cattle ranch industry, and agribusinesses is the forte of Bolsonaro. Bolsonaro's popularity comes from the big support of the big commercial agricultural branch of Brazilian economy. And they, especially cattle rearing is a huge industry there. So if they can help improve the quality and the yield of cattle in India, it will be phenomenal addition. So there are lots of benefits we are getting. What are they getting from it, from the bilateral? It's very clear. I mean, Bolsonaro initially started with the view of wooing the West and trying to shift towards the pro-Western foreign policy, which is a departure from previous leaders like Lula or Cardoso. But now, the pragmatic realities, Ramesh, are such that, they need Asia, and especially big markets in Asia. So Indian investment, by the way, is quite huge. I mean, relatively speaking, because the Brazilian investment in India is still low. It's hardly $1 billion. But Indian investment is already $6 billion. There's a lot of privatization going on. Their, electricity sector is being opened up. Their utilities are up for grabs. So our companies, some of our companies are going out. But Prime Minister will want them to also invest here. And that's to facilitate that process. For a reverse flow of funds from Brazil to India, we need foreign investment from all quarters to pull out of the sluggish growth right now. So I think this partnership is truly developmental And the more we stress on the bilateral, it will make it a kind of a concrete thing on the basis of which then we can, what Prime Minister was saying, कि अंतरराष्ट्रीय मंचों पे हम हमेशा साथ रहें, that will go even higher provided Bolsonaro sees the economic benefit of the relationship, and that's what we are trying to reinforce in this visit.
Indeed. You've raised a number of valid points there, Professor. Professor Chaulia, I want to dwell a bit on one point you mentioned, that's Bolsonaro's ambition or aim to woo the West, so to speak. Now, in that context, we have three leaders in the Americas and in India. We have President Trump in the US, President Bolsonaro in Brazil, and Prime Minister Modi in India. Now, they seem to share a similar worldview. Now, is there scope for cooperation or a plurilateral cooperation among the three countries, given the affinities among these three world leaders?
Well, Ramesh, I will say that they are somewhat different. Bolsonaro has more in common with Trump because he's more like a far right kind of a politician who espouses quite extreme views in some cases. I think our Prime Minister is quite centrist, and he carries along many sections of society. Bolsonaro is trying to radically redefine the Brazilian identity, national identity. But interestingly, both in the case of Trump and Bolsonaro, their bureaucracies and the diplomatic paraphernalia and the intelligentsia are in many ways preventing radical shifts. So I think especially in the case of Brazil, I think they have a very strong foreign ministry and a tradition of global involvement and all that. So even if Bolsonaro has some populist instincts, I don't think he is able to fulfill them. In fact, that is the reason he has already been to China. He has come to India in a big way for one of our major celebrations. It shows that that global South orientation is not going to go away, no matter what the president's own personal ideological beliefs are. And as far as the triangular cooperation goes, I would say that look, our approach to Latin America has always been on the basis of common agenda, which is to reorder the reshape the world. And often we run into Western domination of major institutions. So there is more of a tango between us and Brazil, where we have a lot in common. For example, in World Trade Organization, historically we've always synced our positions, and we have often been on the same side. There are sometimes Brazil has cases against us, right, and so on, but overall I would say that it's more like the global South has a major opportunity because of Trump, because Trump, despite Bolsonaro's wish to endear himself to Trump, the US market remains quite closed. The American protectionist walls and barriers are increasing. So he has to look for practical reasons to elsewhere. That's why all this push Brazil to have preferential trade agreements with a slew of countries, South Korea, Japan, Vietnam, possibly India. Mercosur is a bloc that Brazil leads,
right,
and that one also is very keen on India. And already China has dominated the space. So I think they want some kind of a balancer, and there I think we can always play a role. The only thing is we need to prioritize some areas where we have common interests, and as Prime Minister was saying and as Ambassador was saying, geopolitically there is zero mistrust.
Right.
You see, that's the great thing. Because of the geography, we don't compete for the same influence in the same spaces. So therefore, there's more synergy and convergence. If Brazil rises, if its economy comes back on track and grows, we will welcome it. We will not see it as a threat, and vice versa. So I think that is where we need to capitalize on it, and surely the captains of industry of both sides will find ways, because ultimately if the leadership are giving direction and saying, look, India is a priority, if Brazil says that, if the president says that and the foreign minister says it, I'm sure that the industry will look at it. Likewise, our CII and ASOCAM and FICCI and all of them are very keen on Brazil. They know it's big, and I think in a way the door is opening for something much bigger that's going to come.
Indeed. Professor, since we mentioned about the geographical distance between the two countries in question, Brazil and India, do you think people-to-people ties could bridge the gap, so to speak, in terms of occupying the mind space in the two countries, in terms of boosting cooperation in culture, in tourism, maybe views, or they employ Bollywood, the Indian films, music, dance, to grab eyeballs and to grab the mind space, so to speak, in Brazil?
Absolutely, Ramesh. The social security agreement that the two leaders just oversaw, which was signed, that's very significant, because that is to enable the expats, the Indians who are working in Brazil, which are about 4,000 people, and Brazilians working in India about only 1,000, to give them, incentives, because earlier there was a kind of potential like a double taxation, a kind of double payment of social security dues on both sides, which was harming remittances and such things. So this agreement can be the basis on the way on which we can expand people mobility on both sides. Tourism is fantastic. I mean, Brazil is extraordinary. I mean, from the Amazon forest to the the Atlantic coast, it's a beautiful country, and Indians would want to go. It's just that connectivity needs to improve. As Ambassador was saying, it's relatively shorter now, but still far. And the other thing is, in the imagination of the people of India, Brazil is still like a distant idea,
Indeed.
They can think of, Copacabana beach or, samba and carnival.
Indians, can't seem to think beyond football and samba and the
soccer.
carnival.
But I think, see, the real strength of Brazil is its 200 million people.
Absolutely.
And that is where the President Bolsonaro was talking. We are now the fate of 1.5 billion, 1.3 billion on our side, 200 million.
True.
By Latin American standards, that's not small, because whole of Latin America is only 650 million. So Brazil is almost 1/3 of the entire southern of the Western Hemisphere, of the southern South America. So I think we need to build those bridges. Academic cooperation also was mentioned by Prime Minister. So these are areas where, because they operate mainly through Portuguese medium, and we are, because of British colonialism, we have the English, there's been a bit of a problem. But over time, I find Brazilian middle classes are increasingly aspirational, want to integrate into global economy, and they are taking to English. So I think eventually that will also bridge, and we need to, through these governmental facilitation, the society to society linkages must be strengthened, because that is going to make it a thick relationship, where people instantly say, aha, Brazil, it's so important. We don't even have to justify it on TV or in print media anymore.
Absolutely. Gentlemen, I'm completely running out of time. On that note, I want to thank my guests, Ambassador Sinha and Professor Chaulia, for joining me on this special broadcast. And that's a wrap on this special program on DD India.